Next, on our municipal elections series are council candidates Christine Boyle and Iona Bonamis, who are from the party OneCity Vancouver. This is a relatively new political party. It was founded in 2014 by independent activists and former COPE members. Community organizer, climate activist, and United Church minister, Councillor Boyle was actually the first OneCity candidate to be elected in 2018. During her time on council, Christine is focused on issues related to climate justice, increasing affordable housing, and prioritizing walking, cycling, and transit over private vehicles. Running mate Iona has had over 13 years of experience as an urban planner. She currently works for the City of Vancouver as a senior transportation planner and is also a small business owner. There are several issues that are top of mind for our voters in this upcoming election. Christine and Iona have selected two to focus on today, being housing and climate. And then finally, of course, financial accountability is one of our favorite topics. And so we're going to throw that in for fun as well. So ladies, thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, good to be here.
Great. Now, before we get into those hot topics of housing and climate action, for the listeners who may not be familiar with both the political party of OneCity or with either of you as our guests and vying for city council, can you maybe take a minute to each introduce yourselves to listeners and a little bit about the party?
Do you want to go first?
Sure. So as you said, I am a senior transportation planner at the City of Vancouver, and I've been there for over 4.5 years. And I'm also a mom of two young boys, a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old. And they're my biggest reason for wanting to run for city council, to help us create a city that's more livable for their generation and the generations to come. And I also have a small business that I run on the side where I make natural skincare products and help people reduce their toxins at home. So a few different aspects of my life.
Yeah, good. Well, you're very busy. I mean, just being a mom of 2 kids alone, but
Yes.
That's good.
Yeah.
Good intro.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
2 very sweet kids.
Yeah.
I was elected for the first time in 2018. And also think a lot about the future of this city. I was born and raised in Vancouver and have lived here most of my life. I moved away a couple times and kept coming back. My parents and 2 sisters still live here. And I see through that lifetime in Vancouver the way that the city could do better in supporting people as they age in the city and as lives change. So I think a lot about all of the friends we've seen get priced out of the city, families raising their kids further and further apart because young parents can't find a place to raise their kids near where their grandparents are. Grandparents can't find a place to downsize. You know, all of those pieces have impacted our own lives. And we'll get to climate. I worry a lot about what that means for the future of our kids and also for the future of our infrastructure and the way we live together. And we've seen such huge impacts of that. So that's what keeps me up at night, juggling many hats as well, and feel really honored to have gotten to work on making some tangible changes on those fronts in 4 years and hope to have more OneCity colleagues at the table to keep doing that work.
Okay, well, that's good. And we do have some good questions on city infrastructure and how it's going to, is it in place for, the future of, continued climate change. Before we jump into housing and climate, let me just talk a little bit more about OneCity. I mentioned in my introduction that it was originally formed through some activists and also some people who kind of broke away from the COPE group. And we obviously had Jean Swanson and Brina Olette into our podcast a couple of weeks ago. How did that come about, and what caused this group to form out of COPE?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I had been a COPE member for many years, though lots of OneCity members have found us with no political affiliation because of shared interest in the issues that we're working on. Jean and I have certainly worked together well on a number of issues that we're both passionate about, particularly around homelessness and housing equity issues. I would say there are also times we've disagreed around some housing issues, and where my focus has really been on kind of pragmatically getting work done, moving the ball in the right direction, even if it's not moving as fast as I would like it to, or getting all the way. I have a very pragmatic approach to politics and to making sure we're making life better for people day after day on the issues I know matter to them. And working with whoever around the table is willing to do that work and get things done.
Okay, that's good. One more question about OneCity. Now, you're one of actually quite a few parties that are not fielding a mayoral candidate. What's the reason for that?
We get asked that a lot. I got asked if I was...
So you're going to give me a great question answer.
Yes,
then.
totally. So I'm very well practiced on this. I got asked a number of times if I would run. It's no secret that vote splitting has an impact on mayoral races. And my sense was that I have been able to get a lot done around the council table. We have a weak mayor system, and so it matters who's on council too. And I wasn't interested in risking losing my spot on council to run for mayor and to possibly split progressive votes in a way that elected a mayor who I worried would take us backwards on issues I cared about.
Right. Well,
I will say, though, I think Christine would make a great mayor.
Maybe that's a plug for 2026.
We'll see.
Well, I asked Adrian Carr the same question. And I think anybody understands the political situation, how a municipal government in Vancouver forms. I mean, it is a winner-take-all arrangement when it comes to the mayor versus one of 10 spots at city council. So, I mean, I remember asking Adrian the same question. I mean, you slam dunk, you got the most number of votes by a country mile as city councilor. Why not run for mayor? And if I recall, she was one of my very first guests, was along the same lines of I may become mayor, but then I may not, and then I don't have a seat at the table at all. So, okay, well, let's just jump into this topic of housing. Earlier this week, OneCity announced its housing platform. For the benefit of our listeners, can you please provide us with a basic overview of what a fairly in-depth plan you've put together? Can you kind of in 5 minutes or less summarize what this housing platform looks like?
Yeah, so basically it is looking at right now in a lot of the city, we only allow single-family homes or duplexes to be built, and that takes up a lot of land. What we want to do is to allow 4 6-story buildings, apartment-sized buildings, to be built in place of those, and that would house a lot more people on a piece of property. And also to have corner stores or neighborhood retail alongside that, so that people are able to easily walk down and just get their groceries without having to get into a car. Like we used to have years ago.
They kind of started. There's a good story I saw recently on the loss of our local corner stores that we used to have in the 1970s and 80s.
Yeah, they were, the ones that we still see today were grandfathered in, but now they're illegal to be, to have a new one.
Oh, are they?
Except
I didn't know that.
Where they already exist. Oh. So, we need to change our zoning bylaw so we can reintroduce new corner stores and other neighborhood retail.
Okay.
We're also really focused on nonprofit and supportive housing. So we would allow them to be built faster to get through their zoning process more quickly, because right now if you want to build a co-op or a nonprofit development, you have to go through a very lengthy process that increases the cost and decreases the likelihood of it actually happening.
Right.
So we want to streamline that process to enable them to ensure that they have the financing in place and will actually get built quickly.
Okay.
Yeah, we both talked a little in our intro about raising kids here, and our housing platform thinks a lot about how families grow up together in this city. One of the things we know is that, the population of Vancouver is growing as a whole. There are neighborhoods across the city where the population has been declining for decades. And so in particular, our housing platform looks at how we strengthen those neighborhoods by building new housing there and family-sized housing, allowing more people to move back in. When neighborhoods are declining, we see existing small retail struggle. We're seeing that on West 10th Avenue. A lot of businesses having to close down there because there isn't enough foot traffic. There aren't enough neighbors around. Neighborhood schools having to close, not having enough people to sustain good public transportation. So we've been really looking at how do we support rebuilding those neighborhoods, strengthening those neighborhoods, and doing so in a way that's actually viable. You know, I think in the election, in any election, you hear a lot of people talking about affordability, and, you know, often what they're actually proposing is basement suites or laneway homes. We're in a massive housing crisis and a hiring crisis related to it because people can't find places to live here. And so our platform really aims to tangibly address the scale of that crisis, which isn't going to be a secondary basement suite in a handful of places. We need affordable housing in every neighborhood of the city.
Okay, that's good. Well, it gives a good overview. Why don't we spend a minute talking about those two items? So you talked, one of the Iona you mentioned was these 6-story buildings on what would be deemed today as like a single family lot. Mm-hmm. And then the second one was on fast tracking the approval process for, say, co-op or not-for-profit housing. So let me maybe ask you, are you in favor, and Christine, maybe you can comment because you mentioned Jean earlier and you agree on some things and some you don't. Do you like this idea of you've got a co-op housing application or non-profit, should they be able to just sort of fast track through the system, not needing public hearings, not needing to have rezoning approval, like they should be able to just acquire some land, convert it to whatever they need to and build their accommodation?
So I brought that proposal to this council.
Oh, you did? Okay.
This term, Jean supported it. The mayor supported it. The rest of council voted against it, unfortunately, because the community housing sector, nonprofit housing experts came and spoke in support of it, and particularly articulated, I think it's worth clarifying, it's not like boom and it's built. There are a number of ways neighbors still engage that aren't the public hearing process, which is kind of the loudest piece, but town halls, neighborhood notifications and consultation, a way to have your voice heard. But that final approval, as we've proposed it and as I tried to propose it to council, is delegated to staff in the end based on the policy that we would have in place.
Okay, so you already brought this to the
so
table.
I brought this to the table,
and so you brought the table, supported by Jean, and who else?
And Mayor Stewart.
And Mayor Stewart.
Yeah.
And you got 11 people, so 3 were in favor.
Yeah.
And 8 were against.
Yeah.
Okay, so if I can just be devil's advocate, you've got people like the Green Party generally tend to be kind of progressive, right?
Yeah.
How like what if you were to look back and kind of like revisit? Okay, where did it go wrong? Like how come we didn't have more buy-in? What's your take on that?
I remain confused.
Okay.
I remain unclear about why the Greens didn't support it, because they have vaguely supported that idea.
Yeah.
But in that moment, didn't support my proposal of it, despite it having strong support from the community housing sector. And one of the reasons, I mean, look, a 2 or 3 year rezoning process, as Iona said, adds a lot of cost, and so makes the final housing less affordable from opening day. Yeah. But one of the other things articulated by nonprofit housing folks is actually that their ability to access senior government funding is significantly improved if the zoning is in place already.
I see.
So they can get that funding, which we know is needed to make housing more affordable, if senior governments know it's a sure thing, it's going to get built.
It's not immediately, right?
So if they can show it's close, it'll get built. Then we, as a city, are more likely to get federal and provincial funding to build the sorts of housing that we all agree that we need. So I know you've already interviewed the Greens. It's hard to ask them now. I do think there's support broadly for the idea. I think there were political reasons it didn't get supported on the council table. And I know there's been a lot of pushback since that it was not supported.
Okay.
And so I am hopeful that we could get it done in the next term.
In the next term. Okay.
Again, my pitch is with more One City people around the table, we can have clear plans. One of the things I have struggled with on this council is the inconsistency and unpredictability around housing, both at the policy level and in public hearings. And I think that's hard for the public. It's hard for industry. We hear that from nonprofit and private housing providers.
Yeah.
I have been clear and consistent in my approaches in advocating for more housing in every neighborhood, particularly more co-op and nonprofit housing, particularly streamlining and reducing red tape to get that housing built.
Iona, you mentioned earlier that you want to see this process streamlined for nonprofits, co-op housing, because some projects just never come to fruition because it just takes too long and they run out of funding or they don't have the funding to be able to do that. Again, to be devil's advocate, because I've spent a lot of time, I know a lot of the top developers in the city, and unfortunately I just can't get any of them on camera because they're so fearful of speaking out against candidate or council people like yourself, Christine. To be honest with you, that's what they tell me. They just don't want to give themselves a black mark by city council and mayor by calling out city council mayor for what you just described, which is a tedious, very long and expensive process. So to be devil's advocate, isn't it kind of make sense that you just try and streamline the whole system? Like, forget about whether it's co-op or non-for-profit. I mean, if we have a housing a crisis, and the problem can be probably largely solved by just more supply, create more housing, there's more places to people live. Shouldn't we just streamline the whole thing and forget about whether or not it's for-profit, co-op, or not-for-profit?
I think there are a lot of efficiencies that we can achieve and we should be achieving in all areas of permitting at the city. And as being a small business owner, I know how long it takes to get a permit.
Yeah.
My dad is also a small contractor, and he tells me all the time how long it takes to get a building permit, or all of those various steps you have to follow. So yes, I think we should be looking at streamlining kind of everything from building to our community events, closing our streets to have open street events, like all of those things that we should be looking at.
Okay.
Yeah.
And our housing platform absolutely goes there. So we have a particular emphasis on making it faster and easier to build non-market housing. But as Iona spoke to, the proposal to rezone residential areas to allow up to 4 stories of condos or 6 stories of rental is getting at just that. We don't need to have council micromanaging every specific piece of land and the slope of the roof on it. Right now, it's much easier to build tear down an old single family home and build a big new single family home.
Sure.
That's not getting us anywhere. So we certainly are looking at and proposing pretty ambitious approaches for non-market and market housing to get the type of housing we need.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And I was going to also mention the concern about public not having an opportunity to have a say if there's no public hearings. Again, as Christine was saying, that is only one aspect of it. Mm-hmm. And public hearings, unfortunately, the way they're set up right now, they only allow a small percentage of people to express their views. And it's often people who will have time to wait for hours, to be able to speak on the phone or come to council.
So what would you replace public hearings with if you were to remove public hearings?
Well, Christine said, we could have town halls, so where it's less, fewer stakes at the table, and earlier on in the process when we're developing community plans, that's a really good opportunity for us to hear from the public what they would like to see at a higher level, the types of developments they want to see, the types of stores they want to see, the types of services they would like. So at that time, it's a great time for people to kind of look a little bit further out into the longer term and have that vision of what their community could look like for their children and their grandchildren.
Okay. Do you have, so just to make sure we're clear, do you have if your position is to get rid of public hearings, do you have a definitive alternative, or are you just saying get rid of it and we keep going with the rest of the other ways in which people can communicate with us? Or do you have an alternative, like a clear?
So we're not saying no public hearings on anything, but we are saying let's shift away from Vancouver over the last decade in particular has leaned heavily into spot rezoning. So we end up having public hearings for a lot of projects that,
and just to clarify, what is spot rezoning, so to understand?
It's a good question. So it's a rezoning decision on each individual piece of land rather than kind of a community-wide decision. So we end up having these long processes about each individual project. And what we're suggesting is for the majority of projects, particularly, as I said, 4-story strata and up to 6-story rental, we can have one public hearing that makes that decision across an area rather than having to go through a multi-day process in each individual lot. But there will still be projects that are outside of a neighborhood plan, outside of that kind of process, where we would have a public hearing if it's particularly unusual for one reason or another. But not, like I said, not the sort of micromanaging that we see now, not a lot by lot.
That seems reasonable. Let's zero in on this one strategy that I think's caught a lot of people's attention, which is the idea of taking a single family property and basically getting, by your proposal, having almost automatic approval to convert it into a 6-story apartment building or a 4-story strata building. Have I got that right?
Yeah.
So if you look at most lots in Vancouver, whether you're talking East Van, West Van, standard size lot is 33 feet by 120 to 160. So are you proposing that, like, let's say, for example, up in my neighborhood, I live in West Point Grey area, somebody's on a 33-foot wide lot by 140 feet, and I sell my house, the new buyer as a builder comes along, they can literally tear down that house and put up a 4-story strata building. Have I got that right?
Yeah, there's a number of details, that are worth noting, and that,
let's hear them. Yeah.
So one of them is around land lift. If we're rezoning residential areas to allow for more density, which again we think there are significant community and health benefits to doing.
Yeah.
If that increases land value on those lots, we are proposing a kind of set CAC, a public benefit contribution that would go towards amenities in the neighborhood or other affordable housing in another location, so that it's clear there's community benefit from land lift that's created.
Yeah, as a transportation planner, I know how difficult it is to get funding for new transportation projects. So it is really important to make sure any increase in land value that is generated through this process, we capture that and are able to invest it in the transportation infrastructure, the community centers, libraries, those types of things that we need to have a healthy community.
Mm-hmm. And as more people live in the neighborhood, we want more of those public amenities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's use West 10th because, again, in my neighborhood, that I know when you mentioned it earlier, Christine, like I know well, like when we moved into that neighborhood in 2013, I'd say the vacancy rate amongst the commercial buildings there and retail stores was like maybe the vacancy rate was maybe as high as 20%. It's got to be well over 50 at this point. Like I'd actually think probably maybe like 2 out of 10 shops are in business and the rest are just shut down. It's really quite sad. I mean, there's so many banks and there was a bike shop, there was a men's clothing store. I mean, they're just all gone. It's amazing. And I attribute it to, well, partly there's no grocery store. The Safeway's gone, and that was an anchor location. Now, just south of West 10th is West 11th, and you've got all these really nice single-family homes. Just again, to go back to your idea, if I was to be a builder and I went and bought one of those houses that kind of backs onto West 10th, I should be able to tear down that house and build a 6-story rental apartment building. Have I got that right?
Yeah. Well, Christine has said the crisis that we are facing right now with people, growing homelessness on the streets, people, renters who are facing rent eviction, that is an immediate crisis that we need to deal with. Mm-hmm. So, I think that is okay.
Well, and I would add, right now you could do that and build a large new single-family home that would also cast a shadow, and
Right. Yeah,
that's
okay,
allowed
fair.
by right.
Yeah.
And so I do think we need to tip the scales and make it easier to build housing that more people can afford,
Yeah.
rather than continuing to make the easiest option the least affordable option.
Sure. Okay. Just to wrap up around this concept of converting a single family home to a 4-level condo or a 6-level all rental. You mentioned a minute ago, Christine, about the CACs. For the listeners that aren't familiar, this is community assisted contribution. This is basically when a developer is going to, presumably make a profit, part of what the city expects. And it's not just Vancouver. Lots of most municipalities do this. There's an expectation that something is provided by that developer. I think Ian Gillespie's famous for his chandelier that's below the bridge.
Public art contribution is a separate fund.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. But that's the, you commented on that earlier. You talked about land lift and CACs. Have I got that right? And so again, going back to that analogy, there's a house for sale in West 11th near 10th Avenue Village. I agree. We want more people live in that area because it's kind of becoming a bit of a ghost community. And so the idea would be, well, I'm going to make a lot more money by building a 6-story all rental building. So I need to provide something either way by just writing a check to the city or providing maybe some land towards a community park or something. Is that the idea here?
Yeah, and it's not a wide open bucket, which is why I specify the Public Art Fund on large projects is a separate contribution. The bucket of community amenity contributions goes towards public benefit in the neighborhood. Sometimes a portion of it is across the city, but in recognition that more people living here are going to need more services. So I think in your neighborhood about the public library, that public library is in need of a rebuild,
facelift.
particularly if we're welcoming a lot more people into the neighborhood and hopefully bringing a lot more foot traffic back to that beautiful stretch of West 10th.
Yeah.
So that's one bucket. And then DCL's utility contributions are another piece. And again, where we're adding a lot of new housing in neighborhoods that have seen a decline and have fewer people living in them, there's going to be some utility upgrades that need to be made.
Yeah. Okay. Would you have almost like a schedule which says if you? Okay, so it's very straight.
It's not a big negotiation. It's clear because one of the things we hear from industry, I'm sure you do, is the more predictable, the more viable
Absolutely.
these projects are.
100%.
And we do have a schedule right now for the development cost levies.
You do?
Already. Okay. But it's the CACs that is not very transparent. And so developers kind of have to guess at this point.
Well, on behalf of all these developers who never want to get on camera, I can tell you if you two ladies can get back into City Hall and do this, that'll be huge. I mean, one of the developers in particular, they basically have let their land that they've acquired in Vancouver over the last decade and a half, they've let it run. Like they've built and they're not rebuying, and they're focused on North Vancouver, Burnaby, and Edmonton. Because they're just like, I go build North Vancouver, I know exactly what the terms are going to be. And that's one of the big complaints they have about Vancouver.
I think the other benefit is transparency for the public too,
Yes.
because it's unpredictable for builders, but there's also a lot of mistrust from the public about what benefits they're seeing. And we need to rebuild that trust so we can tackle these issues. And so that's a big part of wanting to be clear about what we're expecting and what neighborhoods are getting.
So let's assume that you were able to be successful, and all of a sudden we start seeing these 4-level and 6-level accommodations popping up throughout the city. And let's get back to 10th Avenue, or actually another good example would be Olympic Village. And if we reflect on Olympic Village, you couldn't get anybody to move into Olympic Village after 2010 because, it was that chicken or egg scenario where businesses didn't want to move in because there was nobody living there. And then people didn't want to live there because there were no services. Now, of course, it's the exact opposite. Like, it seems like everybody wants to live in Olympic Village. And so if you think about this concept that Michael Wiebes talked about yesterday, which is his philosophy of like complete communities, and you look at Olympic Village, still does not have a school. Okay. And so it's one thing to provide housing, but how do you address the issue? I know you talked about corner stores, that's one, but how do you revive an environment like West 10th, for example, so that people can look at it and go, well, yeah, great, there's an apartment building, but there's no stores, and I can't, get my dry cleaning done or get a haircut or buy some clothes. How do you address that?
Yeah, so we're also, as part of our platform, we are also going to increase density for employment, jobs, and commercial space, industrial space, so that you have all of these other jobs available and services in the community. And as you said, schools, unfortunately, Olympic Village is still without a school, and we don't want that to happen again. We don't want any existing schools to close down because their population in the area is declining, and we want to make sure any new community or any growth that comes in is accompanied by those really important community services and facilities that we need, like the schools and like the community centers.
So before we move on to climate, is there anything further about your housing platform that we haven't talked about that you're really excited about, that you want to kind of put a plug in for listeners to hear about?
Yeah, so another really important part of our housing platform is protecting existing renters, making sure that they are not rent-evicted, and that we have an actual body that will advocate for their rights. Right now we have a renter's office, and we want to turn that into a tenancy advocacy office that will actually advocate on behalf of renters, so they don't get rent evicted or evicted. And the other thing is, if a development is going to happen on the piece of property that they're living in, they get first right of refusal to come back. And while they are living somewhere else temporarily, that they get a rent top-up, so that they're not increased, they don't have to pay more than their current rent.
Right.
And when they come back, they pay a rent that's similar below to what they were paying before. So that's an extension of some of the rental protections. Wouldn't that
discourage anyone from wanting to build? I mean, if I'm just a sort of mid-level or, kind of one building at a time kind of operator, not a huge builder like the ones you see downtown here, wouldn't that kind of discourage me from wanting to build if I'm just going to get the same rent, but I've spent all this money in investing in a brand new house or building?
I actually think that it's an important question, and that's why stronger tenant protections are an important match to allowing more rental to be built in more parts of the city, because historically what we have allowed in Vancouver is new rental to only be built where there's existing rental.
Right.
And so it's displaced current tenants and meant a loss of some of our more affordable stock, because that's the only place, because we need more rental, and that's the only place we've allowed it. We would instead like to see that existing rental stock protected, at least for a couple decades, while we're building out more rental options,
right.
So that tenants have places to go. So protecting as much as we can that tenants in those buildings while making it a lot easier, more predictable, and faster to build more rental housing where there isn't currently rental housing. I think those two pieces need to go together, and that's the strength of our housing platform.
Yeah. Okay, good. Well, let's jump to climate. Ready?
Yeah.
Okay. So we know that climate change is real. I think like majority of the population at this point has come to accept that, especially after the heat domes from 2021 and the crazy storm we had earlier this year. It's just so obvious. People often talk about, when they were little, they used to be able to make snowmen in their front yard or backyard, and it's a very rare occasion now. Is the city of Vancouver equipped to, infrastructure-wise, this might be a good question for you, Iona. Is the city of Vancouver equipped to deal with the future climate change we're probably still going to face?
I think there is a lot of room for us to actually do more to make sure our city is prepared for these more frequent kind of extreme weather events. The floods we've seen, the heat domes we experienced last year, we weren't prepared at that point.
Yeah.
So making sure that people are safe, that they have places to go, and they are well looked after, especially seniors. Like in the heat dome, a lot of seniors didn't even realize they were, in heat exhaustion. Making sure that we are taking care of the entire population in those events is really important. and then also making sure that our infrastructure can withstand these floods, the sea level rise. Our transit system is air conditioned, and make sure that the people.
And is it? I don't know.
We have some, like some of our sky trains and some of our buses increasingly do have air conditioning. So making sure those things are in place, and also having redundancy in our system. So if there is a disruption to one route, there is another option so that the bus service can still remain. People can still get home if there's an emergency that happens.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe since we're on the theme of climate change, and you did highlight your climate emergency action plan, and one of the goals that you stated in that plan, Christine, was that you wanted to see carbon pollution in the city of Vancouver cut by 50% by 2030. Have I got that right? Yeah. Okay. So it's 2022. So that's like close to the end of 2022. So we're like, 8 years away, or 7 almost, from getting there. So the first question is, are we on track right now?
We aren't on track.
We're not?
No.
Okay. I mean, I ran the math on this myself because I went through the budget. I nerd out on these kind of things.
Right.
And I, by my estimates, the amount of carbon emission reductions by the city of Vancouver was so small in the last, 3 years, that for the next 7 years, we have to almost like 4x the amount of activity that we've done so far.
Yeah.
So like, even if we just continue to do what we're doing, we're going to totally miss that target. So, so I kind of knew the answer was no, we're not on track. So, so tell me, like, how do we get there?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So I will say, to not, just so I'm not too doom and gloom all of the time, one of the biggest challenges has been turning the ship around. So our emissions were increasing year after year. Population was increasing too. We're now at a place where our population is increasing and our emissions aren't. Even that is a tough turn to make, and an incredibly important one.
Yeah.
You are absolutely right that we need to accelerate our action, and my hope and evidence from elsewhere is that these actions can build upon themselves, so that emissions start to reduce more quickly if we're acting. And it's not a mystery, the work that we need to do. Like I said, it's getting gas out of buildings, and it's getting gas out of our transportation system. The challenge is doing that as we add more people, and to be honest, the challenge is doing it in a way that doesn't overly punish people who are struggling the most. And coming back to that question, I think, is really important.
Yeah, look, we know, as I said, we know what the solutions are. It's about kind of how do we mix that with the immediate needs that we have right now, and not increasing the burden on people who are already facing a lot of other more immediate needs, having a roof over their head, getting a job. And so achieving that balance is really important for us. But we always really need to keep in mind that, in the long term, if we don't do something now, we are going to be, paying for it more out of our pocket. So we are looking at requiring larger homes right now if they are going to replace their heating system, to replace it with a renewable energy system,
which often provide air conditioning too. We have a heat pump in our home, and we've been happy campers for that in the summer.
One of my very first guests on Coastal Front, like 3 years ago, was Matt Horn. I mean, you may know Matt. So and I love that. Was a great conversation. I'm very passionate about the environment myself. My whole family's adopted the EVs. We don't ride our bikes so much, but because we have a lot of kids and a lot of hockey gear. What he stated was, if you look at just the carbon emissions from the city of Vancouver's own infrastructure, not the city as a whole, but just what the city owns, which are vehicles and buildings, 80% is from just those two things. And so he talked a lot about trying to retrofit old schools, city hall, other older buildings, get them off gas. One of the things I talked with the Green Party about yesterday was the outdoor pools. I mean, I think Kitsilano Pool, which I love taking my kids to, is powered by either diesel or gas. And just even pools alone, to convert those to be heated by electricity or something else, is a massive cost, right? There's a huge amount of both infrastructure and converting to electricity is very, very expensive. When you look at the supply chain issues around EVs right now, like nobody can get an EV. So all these rebates that are being promoted by the provincial and federal government really don't mean anything because you got to wait 18 to 24 months to get an electric vehicle. So how do you possibly manage that? I mean, I guess my question would be, if your goal is 2030 to cut emissions by 50%, but the amount of money and infrastructure that needs to be spent is just so monstrous, aren't you kind of kidding yourselves that you can even get there in the first place? Like, why not have a realistic goal? Like make it 2050 and make your zero emissions like 2100 or something like that.
I mean, the goal is set by the science,
Okay.
so there's not a lot of negotiating there. But the changes are exponential, I think, is what we see. You know, if EV uptake, I don't have the exact number, but we're not seeing it go up by the same amount each year. We're seeing quite a steep curve on that front, which is why we've hit this moment. It's the same situation with heat pumps right now, where there's more demand than there is supply.
Yeah.
But industry is scrambling to catch up. And I think what we're going to see pretty quickly is a massive shift on that front
Okay.
because of it. And so that makes me hopeful. The market is going to catch up pretty quickly to that demand.
So you're confident in that?
I mean, I'm nervous, of course.
Yeah.
I lie awake worried about this
Okay.
all of the time. But
Because we're like, if we just talk about EVs for a second, which is a area I have a lot of knowledge on, we had Joe Lowry, who is one of our guests. He's actually a world-renowned leader and knowledge, thought leader, if I could call him, in the world of lithium. He gets hired by the world's largest lithium mining companies. And he's basically said we are in a shortfall between demand and supply. That's just the demand for it and the supply are actually going in different directions because it's so hard to mine it, and there's so much demand. And that's why we're seeing delivery times for electric vehicles taking longer and longer. Like a year or two ago, even in the thick of COVID, you could get an electric vehicle in like 6 months. Now you're waiting like 18 to 24 months, and the predictions are it's going to get out to further like 3 to 4 years. So if we just talk about EVs alone, how do we possibly achieve these goals if the industry can't produce because of these supply chain issues?
Yeah. Well, when we talk about EVs by itself, I guess
Yeah.
it's not the only piece of the puzzle. It's one part of it. And it is about building complete whole communities where people can actually get out and just walk or bike, maybe to their hockey game, hopefully, and in the future, without having to get into a car.
Okay.
So that is a really big part of it, because having just a lot of EV vehicles on the streets is not going to be a solution. They still take up space. There's still going to be the congestion problem, right? So the fewer people
That's a good comment. Yeah.
the fewer people who have to drive, the better. And then also, I think we can be working with industry to make sure that the technicians are trained, they have the education, the skills required to meet these industry demands, and work with industry to ensure that people who are employed in a business where in a business where it requires burning fossil fuel to get them retrained into the green energy sector.
Just going to add to that, on the example of heat pump, city staff work with post-secondary institutions like BCIT to make sure, as our approach is adapting, that we're working with industry and supporting that retraining, supporting those local jobs and trades and post-secondary institutions to meet the growing needs in the city. But I think Iona articulates well that on EVs, we can't just shift our whole current transportation system from gas cars to electric cars. We do need to build out a more robust system, which might not mean that you're carrying your hockey equipment to your game, but whatever trips don't need a car makes more space for the trips that do need a car, and where families can downsize from 2 vehicles to 1, or from 1 vehicle to a car share. My family drives a pretty significant sized electric cargo bike that I'll stick 2 kids on the back or a lot of groceries on. So building out all of those options gives people more choice, and improves our transportation system too.
Yeah. Okay. Good. That's well said. Yeah, and I'm in favor. I love the idea. Okay, let's now jump to our favorite topic, which is financial accountability. I thought instead of trying to get very philosophical about this, I'd narrow in on one particular topic that's kind of bugged me a bit, and you would know well, and it's what I call the cup tax fiasco. Despite being approved prior to COVID, the cup tax was implemented this calendar year. And it's basically, for those who don't know, although I think everybody in the city knows at this point, it's a 25-cent takeaway for the cup provider. Now, Coastal Front did a lot of our own research on this. If you look at the three largest coffee providers in Vancouver, BC, Canada, it's Tim Hortons, Starbucks, and McDonald's. I mean, three major publicly traded Canadian-American companies. And so if you look at this, I term it the cup fiasco because I think it's a bit of a fiasco. To me, it's just a cash grab. I mean, I haven't seen McDonald's or Starbucks or Tim Hortons make any changes to their practices, yet they're now collecting an extra 25 cents per sale of coffee from customers going straight into their pocket. So I guess my first question, because I believe, Christine, you were in favor of supporting this cup tax.
Sort of cautiously and with some reluctance, but
right. And this came out quickly. Like, I mean, it was like January 1st, the tax came in. I think you guys were under a lot of pressure under city council because like 2 weeks later, you guys brought it back to the table with staff because like people were going, this is crazy. Why am I paying this 25 cents? Here we are. It's like September of 2022. We still have this cup tax. To me, it's like just a cash grab for like the biggest corporations in the world. It's not like benefiting anybody. It's not accomplishing any issues around environment. It's not helping. I mean, maybe it's helping a little bit some of these small coffee shops, but ultimately we ran the math, and in Vancouver alone, we estimate that each of those three franchises takes in about an extra $3 million a year now in revenue straight to their bottom line, pure profit, and they haven't changed their practices. So I guess my first question is kind of more towards yourself, Christine, because you've been on council for this.
Yeah.
Why do we still have this cup tax?
Yeah, I mean, I have wrestled with all of these same pieces, absolutely. You know, I think if you asked Vancouverites now, certainly a few years ago, people are aware walking down the street and seeing garbage cans overflowing with these sort of quick single-use products, that we should do something about that.
I think everybody's in favor of that,
yes,
100%.
That this is a problem to be solved. And this is one of, quite frankly, many examples where local governments don't have the tools that we need to try to tackle the issues in front of us. And that's a issue I raise again and again with particularly partners in the provincial government, because so much more is expected of local governments, and we don't have the tools. So as you say, one of our challenges on this front, so, you know, on a lot of different issues, a fee is an effective tool in shifting consumer behavior.
Sure, that's what taxes have two purposes. They change behavior and they generate revenue.
Yeah. So here's this problem. People recognized it existed. Here's a tool we've used to solve other problems.
But it's not causing any change.
Yes, except exactly.
It's not even in revenue. Like, at least if it was going to the city, I'd be like, okay, well, you know, at least there's more money in the balance of the coffers of the city of Vancouver. But it's literally going into the hands of McDonald's Corporation, one of probably the largest polluters in the world. We talk about carbon emissions.
Yeah.
And they're just getting more money. Like, I guess my simple question is, why don't you just, you know, go to council, say, look, this is a silly decision. We made a mistake. Let's cancel this thing and revisit.
So I was very in favor of looking at the impact on lowest income residents, and that was the sort of first big flag. I think you're right. As you said, you know, the empty homes tax is an example. Here, the tax has an impact on properties coming back into the rental market, and where they don't, there's revenue generated that goes into affordable housing. That works. The problem with this tax is that it's not going into anything of any benefit. So that first piece around how was impacting somebody getting a voucher for a free drink from a local shelter or charity, we got on that pretty quickly. I guess the thing that I had wrestled with a lot about this, about your exact question of do we kill it or figure out how we make it work, is that the problem still exists, and all of this work had been done on this approach. And so by the time it came to council, and I spoke when we were talking about climate about my very fierce commitment to policies that make a difference.
Yeah.
And so I have not been championing this type of approach. I feel really mixed about it. But in the end, having seen that work be done, I am interested in how we evaluate what numbers our staff have been collecting, and whether we can convince the province to change that legislation so that at least that revenue is going towards something, if we can get the province to make that change. And there are numbers that it's shifting behavior. Good. We should keep adapting it. And if we get those numbers back and this whole thing is a fiasco a year in, like
but
it
do you really
has
need
been so
staff
far.
to get you numbers? I mean, isn't it kind of obvious to you? I mean, like basically I go to McDonald's, I buy a coffee, I pay them an extra 25 cents. The city doesn't get anything. I'm out of pocket 25 cents. They haven't changed their practices whatsoever. I mean, what more do you need? I mean, like,
I guess the question is, and my behavior isn't a perfect example of this, so this is why I want the numbers. You might have the numbers more than me, but is that fee shifting consumer behavior? Are people bringing a cup more often than they would have, or
well, like I can, okay.
Maybe you aren't, and I was bringing a cup before, so we're not good examples. So that's, I mean, that's why I'm interested in.
My wife's tried it. So my wife goes and says, I've got 3 cups. Can you put my McFlurry in there? Like, no, we can't do that.
Yeah.
Right? So this is where I'm just like, come on, like I applaud you. I applaud you folks for getting rid of banning plastic single-use bags. Yeah. You know, even like the, charging for paper bags, I can kind of see that, because now people are changing their behavior. Do you need a bag? No, I'm okay. I brought my bag. Yeah. But the cup part one, anyways.
Look, I'm not attached to it, as I said. This is not the hill I'm dying on. If the numbers come back to us that it's not working, then we need to figure out another approach, absolutely. Okay. Because, like I said, I
can
think,
get the numbers for you far faster than
you send me the numbers. I'm happy to, I certainly believe very strongly in, and our platform throughout is focused on evidence-based decision-making. One of our other council candidates, Ian Cromwell, is a PhD in public health, and his work is on evidence-based public health decisions, and he continues to bring that lens to our platform that I think is incredibly important, making these decisions based on the evidence that we have, evaluating them well, and I wish some of that had happened earlier in the process.
Hey, look, we all make mistakes,
but here we are, and
if you're going to lose, don't lose the lesson.
Yeah.
Okay, let's jump to one other question I have around financial accountability, and it's a really simple question. A lot of politicians get hung up on this because they don't get asked this question very much. You get reelected, you become 2 of the 10 city council members for this next 4 years in a month's time. How are you going to save taxpayers' money?
Yeah. Well, I think we, as a staff person and as a taxpayer, I know how important it is to make sure that we're spending our taxpayers' money efficiently, and putting it in in solutions that will actually achieve the results that we want. So I think it is really important for us to make sure that any decision we make, we are always thinking about what impact it has. Is it worth the expenses that we're going to put towards it? So,
yeah, feel like I've been talking actually about financial accountability and transparency a lot this term, in part because I believe strongly that government is going to need to play a role in tackling the crises that we face. And, I think of one of the examples that came to mind in thinking about this was the Portland Loo that the Park Board built at quite a high expense. Examples
this
like
is the $2 million toilet we're talking about? Okay,
yeah. So examples like that get me worked up, because I want us to build 5 public washrooms if we can, rather than just 1 with that money. I want us to be doing the most possible good for each dollar that we are entrusted to be spending on behalf of the public. And so I probably have spent more time in the weeds of each budget in the last 4 years than anyone else around the council table. I mean, I am pretty determined on this stuff because there's so much to do, and so we need to be doing it well. And then the other thing I'd add, and we've spoken about this particularly on housing, is that there are a number of ways that we are proposing streamlining processes to make it faster and easier to do the work we need to do. You know, there are important safety considerations to make sure we're still staying on top of, but there are a lot of ways that we can streamline permitting that will save taxpayer money and will save time and money for small businesses and folks existing in the city. So that's where our platform looks most specifically.
Yeah.
It's something we all hear from the public again and again, everywhere from a renovation to a kitchen in a new restaurant and far beyond, and work that we can do on that front.
Okay. I love the name OneCity, by the way. I think it's, out of all the brands, it's a great name. Like, it just kind of makes you feel really good. So for those listeners who've liked what they've heard, how do they get involved? What do you need from them? Tell us, this is your chance to do a little bit of plug for OneCity.
Yeah. Well, we are a mostly volunteer-run organization, so we always need more volunteers to help us canvas, door-to-door, attend events, but there's also things like in the background to do too. So always happy to have more volunteers help us, and of course, to run a campaign, we do need money.
Yeah.
It's not cheap to print all of the promotional materials. So any donation of any amount is appreciated. We are a party of small donations, many small donations.
Yeah, I think our average donation is $36. So we have a lot of small donors, but grateful for every donation. You can sign up for a lawn sign, you can sign up to volunteer, you can make a donation all at OneCityVancouver.ca. We are on all of the social media platforms, not hard to find at all. And maybe we can just plug our fellow council candidates. In particular, OneCity is running 4 of us for council, Iona and I, as well as Ian Cromwell, who I mentioned, who is a public health expert and a local musician, and does a lot of work organizing local arts and culture events and street festivals, and a lot of focus on health and community in that way. And our fourth council candidate is Matthew Norris, who is the president of the Urban Native Youth Association. He's doing a PhD in Indigenous governance. He's worked at the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, and a deep wealth of knowledge in governance, and also connections and relationships across Indigenous communities and the nation. So 4 voices, I think, would make a big difference on this council to focus and work hard and tackle the issues that on the doorsteps Vancouverites keep telling us are important to them.
Yeah, great. Well, and they've got to hear this story from the two of you. Great spokespeople for OneCity. Christine Boyle, Iona Bonamis, thank you very much for being on Coastal Front today. Best of luck with this upcoming election. It's only around the corner, so appreciate you being in here
Thank
today.
you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
It was fun.
A pleasure.
Thanks. Good.